So some of you may be aware, some of you may not be aware, I hope you are. Later on this year, we will see the world's athletes gather in Tokyo, Japan for the Summer Olympics. People all over the world will tune in for a couple of weeks in July and August for 2 weeks of watching endless hours of television of running and jumping and swimming, weightlifting, and even surfing. And while these contests will be exciting to watch, lots of high drama, lots of medals will be won and lost by fractions of a millisecond. There are more important races going on each and every day in each and every one of our lives. Our race, the one that we're all in, is a long one that at times can become challenging. There will be highs, there will be lows, but it's worth it. And in fact, endurance in the race that we call life is spoken by several inspired writers, and they spoke about our journey as disciples as a race. And I was thinking of what passages talked about that, and a couple came to mind. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning in verse 24, says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified." The other passage is in Hebrews 12, in the first two verses. And the writer there says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God." I had originally had the idea of talking about a poem, and Brother Ben exhorted me and helped me to keep it between some guardrails, so I'm not going to read this poem, but it's one of my most favorite poems that I've ever heard, and it's called "The Race" by D.H. Groberg. And when I was in high school is when I learned of this, and it really helps to accentuate this idea of our race. And if you're not familiar with the poem, I encourage you to read it. It'll only take you a few minutes to read, and it brings out some really good points. And while I won't read it to you right now, it's worth pointing out that the young man described in this poem, out with all these other boys and dads watching and families, and he's so excited that he trips and falls. And he gets up, and then he trips and falls again. And then he gets up, and then he trips and falls again. And each time he looks up in the crowd and sees his father's face. And his dad doesn't say anything, but you can tell on his father's face that it's telling him to get up and win. And even though he doesn't win the race, the crowd cheers for him as loudly, if not louder, than they did for the kid that won. And there's a really good lesson in there, I think, for us. Because even more important that he got up and kept running and kept trying, it's that he finished the race. And even though it's great to read poems and stories like that, talk about them, as Christians, let's remember that what Paul and others said about pressing on. Let's remember that what they said about the race that we're in each and every day. Let's remember that we're not just racing to race. We're racing to win the ultimate prize, and that's a home in heaven. Maybe you haven't started running your race. You can do that tonight. Put on Christ in the waters of baptism. The water is ready. You can one day receive that ultimate prize of heaven if you're ready to do that. Maybe you've already started running your race. Maybe you've been running a long time and you're tired. Maybe you've slipped and fallen. The key is not to stay down, beaten, and quit. The key, as that poem talks about, is to get up and win the race. Take your rightful place so that you can receive your eternal reward. I'm sure we'll see this later on in the Olympics. It happens almost every time that a runner will trip and fall. But what do they always do? Do they stay down and quit? No. They get back up and they finish. Let's be sure that we do the same. If you want to become a Christian tonight, or if we can help you to be a better Christian, please come forward now while we stand and sing.